Welcome to Rick on Life, brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Media Project. I'm your host, Rick Amitin, and this is where we love to talk about things that impact our lives. Today, we're going to be discussing some things that with Luca Majno that might actually be things you haven't heard before. Might even be some things I haven't heard before. And some things might actually shock you. And you might be tempted to quickly dismiss them because they appear to be out of the mainstream. But if you're like me, I want to be informed. I want to know. And while I don't recommend just taking somebody else's word for what they believe, I think you ought to investigate and know for yourself and make up your own mind, which is what I do. And I certainly encourage that for you. Luca Majno is the TLB Project Media Technical Director. He's also the co-host of Global News Update, a show right here on TLBTV. He's an investigative journalist, a researcher, and passionate advocate for indigenous people, the original people, of their Turtle Island, which is now North America. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and raised in Geneva, Switzerland, and he has lived for the past 25 years in Canada, where his activism started. And he has since lived in Tennessee and Keokuk, Iowa, where he now resides. He believes that exposing past and present crimes of any nature is a sure way to change the course of humanity toward a better future. Luca, welcome to Rick on Life.
Wow, that sounds like a pretty good intro. I couldn't have said it better myself. It's an honor, Rick. It's a real honor to be with you on your show.
Thank you. Listen, I have some friends in Zurich, and they actually ended up there as refugees from Iran. But I wonder, how did you come to be raised in Switzerland?
My father, as a doctor, he was a pathologist, and he was very popular in the Boston and the Massachusetts area, the Worcester area. And he was, teaching medical school, first and second grade. So you're really, you're in that kind of platform. In the first 9 years of my life, we lived in Boston. My father got a job offer from the University of Geneva, Switzerland, to move the whole family over. And in 1969, that's what we surely did. But instead of flying over, we took the boat over, which was a real beautiful experience at the time. And I'll never forget going through the Strait of Gibraltar with those dolphins on either side of the ship. It's like they were guiding us in. I managed to get to the front of the ship, and I saw the dolphins like they always show, and they were showing us the way in.
How long did you live there?
4 years.
4 years?
Yeah, 4 years. Beautiful years.
You lived, for 25 years in Canada.
Almost 30, yes.
Almost 30 years.
From 1980.
I'd be curious to know, what was the social, political climates of those countries? And at that stage of your life, were you paying attention to those types of things? And how would they compare to the United States here?
Right now, I can reflect on my situation in Europe, as Switzerland, or what I lived from Switzerland, from being the same thing as it is here. Exactly the same thing. And you think that Switzerland, because it's not talked about in the media, you see them as a totally neutral country, but then you learn about World War II, and that's where all the money and the gold was stored, but that's beside the point. But when I grew up, I saw that Switzerland was very rough indeed. I got raped by the next door neighbor who had a store when I was 11 years old. So you really, you get you get your ideals pretty well shattered when stuff like that happens. But it's the same thing as the States, basically, from what I can tell.
Now, was there any particular reason that you came back to the United States to live, or was that just the normal progression of?
It was, yeah, it was a normal progression, and for some reason, my father wanted to get back there, and the UMass Medical School also was his baby, if you can call it that, and they made a plaque for him and everything, and when he resigned. But yeah, we lived in Worcester after that, and then Shrewsbury, which is the adjoining suburb, for a year, and then I left home and I did my own thing down in Martha's Vineyard because the family kind of broke up. It was a very dysfunctional family to begin with, from start to finish. So I'm still learning about that one.
With the area. I have family in the Providence area, and I was in the military station in Brunswick, Maine. So I used to travel through Massachusetts all the time, going back and forth to Rhode Island. And I had friends that were actually from the Boston area. A guy I was stationed with, he used to go spend a little bit of time down in the Boston area. So I'm a little familiar with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Your show, Global News Update, is a show where you're reporting on events around the world. And,
yes.
And very passionately, I might say.
I'm cheating, though. I'm cheating because the name is called Global News Update, but the more that I did them, the more that I'm going, no, you can't talk about today and what's coming up without talking about how it got here.
Right.
Because to me, how things came to be to now is as important as where they're going to go from now on. So if you can talk to people that have been able to put the blocks in place and find out okay, this is what happened until now, this is the projected future. They're not reading, they're not prophecies. They're not, what's the word? They're not prophetic. They're not people who can see the future. They're people who have studied the past and who know where this is going.
Yeah. And now, have you always been, interested in world events, or was there a moment, something that happened that, brought this to your attention and gained your interest?
This is where I thought you were going when you were talking about Cape Cod, because on Martha's Vineyard, my grandmother would call us the Three Little Indians. We would be playing with the kids from Martha's Vineyard, from the Vanderhoop family, they were called, and they were on the tip of the island, which is now called Aquina, rightly so, because the white invaders, I shouldn't say white, the European invaders in 1602 called the place Gay Head, and it got back its name from the Wampanoag Indians to Aquina, which means land on top of the hill. So because I was playing with those Indians and playing at the cliffs, and my sister was involved in craft making, Indian style, Wampanoag style, there definitely was a very powerful Native American implant in me, so to speak, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all four of them. So I carried that a long time. And then in Canada, that's where I started to be interested in Native American genocide and the original people here. And this is how it was for 10,000 years, way back before, the invaders got here. And that's what brought me to today, because if somebody gave me a minute to explain the whole scenario today, I would say simply that, they genocided the original people with these kinds of weapons and they killed them off, but now they can't do that. So we're doing exactly the same thing today with the people that we have living today, in different forms, poisoning the air, poisoning the soil, poisoning the water. That's what they're doing. It's very obvious, and more people are becoming aware of it because they're slipping up or they're getting sloppy, whichever,
Yeah. Luke, I want to bring up the subject of 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a a little bit of an unusual personal experience in that I was actually flying on 9/11. I was on my way to Sofia, Bulgaria, and I had to change planes in Paris. And if I remember right, it was an hour and a half layover that I had. And when I landed in Paris, the news hadn't reached there yet. So there was nothing, that was giving us any indication that this had happened. I made my connecting flight, went on to Sofia, and my friends picked us up. They didn't know it. Anything had happened. And so we stopped and had lunch. And when we got back to the apartment, his wife said, they're attacking New York. And when we looked at the television screen and, we saw the buildings, planes flying into the buildings and the buildings crashing. I mean, it was a horrible sight. It was nearly, unbelievable. And of course, the initial reports were that this was terrorists and, that they were flying into the buildings and killing people. And it wasn't long after that I began to hear stories of conspiracies and, that it was something else behind it that was actually happening. And you hear so many of these things, and until something really jars your attention, it's not, from a general standpoint, it's not something that people, I think, jump onto in large quantities. I think people who have a different exposure through the military or the industrial complex, those types of things where there might be some understanding that's already there behind the scenes. But I think in a large way, the general population doesn't know how to respond to things like conspiracy theory or thinking, that their government could actually harm them in this way or be a part of anything that would do that. And I know that you have a position. And so if you could start from the beginning so that somebody who doesn't have any behind the scenes information might begin to understand how you put these thoughts together and how we can then investigate for ourselves and look at these conclusions that you have drawn.
I'm glad I was taking notes before your show.
Good.
No, this is exactly what I was kind of hoping to be asked, because it's so hard to be general about stuff like that and be polite at the same time,
Sure.
and say what people want to hear, because it's not what they want to hear and they're not going to like it. And I think the truth item of every show that we do is when we say, don't believe us, do your research. Hey, I didn't write this stuff. I didn't make it up. I'm just sharing it. Right. One person, write it down. One person by the name of Robert David Steele, that's Steele with an E. He said, every single terrorist attack we've ever had in this country was a false flag. Okay? Just that one phrase. You could meditate on it for years. Okay? Every single false flag. Every single, what they call terrorist attack. In other words, an attack. World War I, World War II, Bay of Pigs invasion, Operation Northwoods was really interesting. That's a very good example. That was a warm-up for 9/11. In Operation Northwoods, what they did, they came up to Kennedy and they said, look, we want to fly a plane, a mock plane, and not have anybody in it, like remote control, and blow it up, and then say Cuba did it so we can attack them. And Kennedy not only fired the general for saying that, but he scrapped the story. He scrapped the plan. And you can see the plan, you can see the memo, if you go out there and you look at it. All of the attacks that we've had are staged. The Boston bombing, Waco, Oklahoma City bombing especially. It's not one kid with a bomb that can blow the whole face of a building off. That Oklahoma City bombing itself was called the warm-up for 9/11. That's where I got that quote from. That's what they called it. And how come 14 months before 9/11 even happens, Greg Ford, my co-host, gets called to a meeting with the higher-ups in the CIA, Secret Service, FBI, whatever.
Now, what was his position at the time?
He was high up there. He was working in that field.
But I mean, he was actively engaged at the time.
Yes, and he's the one who got tortured for blowing the whistle on the weapons of mass destruction that were in Iraq, which followed 9/11. That was the whole reason for 9/11 to happen, because Cheney and Halliburton sell weapons of mass destruction to Iraq, and then point the finger and say there's weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Greg Ford was working right there at the time, and he saw them, chemical weapons and all, and he even has the bill of lading from Halliburton. He even has the German doctor who took care of him and who cured him after he was injected with the MK Ultra drugs and tortured by his own people. This is why he's taking them to court, and this is why this whole thing is going on in his life at the moment. So he basically had his life ruined by his own military, by his own service, multi-decade service. So just backing up a minute, when 9/11 happened for me, it was very obvious. It was very obvious because I had studied how the buildings were made. They're a hollow shell poured of concrete all the way up and have an inner structure that's, you can't. If buildings came down as a result of planes hitting them, they were the first 3 in the history of the world on the same day. Okay, so you look into it. Well, there's that beautiful Latin phrase that says that the person who stands to benefit from a crime is probably the one who initiated it and who's responsible for it. And that's Israel. Okay, and it has been since, even before Israel was created in 1917 by the Balfour Declaration. Rothschild in Europe. Rothschild has 2 sons. Rothschild pretty well built America as it is now, and he also has Israel. They're 2 sons. 2, if you don't mind me saying, bitches of one another. That's how they call them. They serve each other, and Israel was put in place because they wanted the whole Middle East. This is the whole idea. This is why they destroyed 7 countries in 5 years. There's signs all over the place, and there are little pieces of the puzzle that you put together, one by one. And Israel
is a tough pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Right.
One, from a historical perspective, but then you have the place that Israel has occupied in the minds, certainly of the religious community.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start talking about these connections of Israel to 9/11, that they could actually be behind, such a horrendous thing. Again, I think for the general public is very hard to swallow. The Rothschilds are somebody that every American ought to know about and ought to know the history about and who they are, and what their connections are, and the wealth of the Rothschilds is.
I can pinpoint it to the Titanic.
It's unbelievable.
I can pinpoint it to the sinking of the Titanic. I have to apologize because I've been at this you know how they say about relationships when you have to investigate each other, okay? When you have to get a private investigator to go check out what, you may as well forget it, okay? Well, I've been doing this about my government for 30 years now, at least, if not more. Every single day there was something else. Monsanto one day, Rockefeller Medicine next day. Let's see, chemtrails the next day, 9/11 over here. And they all fit. They all fit. The sinking of the Titanic, first of all, was an insurance fraud with JP Morgan. They switched the plates on the 2 ships, and they were identical. And that's a fascinating story in itself. But the 3 people that were on board, let's see if I can remember them. Isa Strauss, Benjamin Guggenheim, and oh wow, I don't remember the third one. Isa Strauss, Benjamin Guggenheim, and the other guy. The other guy, I forget. Yeah. They were the world's richest people of the day. and they were against the Federal Reserve. 1912, the Titanic goes down. What happened in 1913? Oh, all three of them died, so let's go ahead with the Federal Reserve. 1913, it was put in place. So that's another piece of the puzzle you can put in there, and everything fits. And the problem is that most people don't have this information, so the government wants us to fight amongst each other because that's the best way to conquer us.
When it's, yeah, I still let's try to draw a more deliberate line. So when you feel like Israel is behind the 9/11 incident, how so? I mean, put the pieces of that together.
It's hard to say in one show. There's so many connections. Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, and even Ben Gurion before him were saying how America was going to be Israel's golden calf, and we were going to tear it apart from the inside. We were going to use them, and you should hear what they say about the Goyim, the people that aren't Rothschild Zionists, the people that aren't the ones that don't have an inferiority complex. Why was Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone with Larry Silverstein every single Sunday for years? Okay, what's this thing called the Greater Israel Project? The Greater Israel Project started in the 70s or 80s when they just wanted to get rid of everybody in the Middle East. They wanted to control the Middle East. There's a lot of stuff behind it. It's not just one thing that you can pinpoint. And it was paid for by the Saudis. The three people that were working security and letting people through at the airports were directly connected with Israel. You know, every single thing you can think of as far as security for, on that day was either shut off or it's very obvious. You can't do something that big without leaving some kind of trace.
When the president then comes out and, I remember his words. May not be able to quote them exactly, but I remember his words when he said, how terrible it was for the people who knocked down these buildings, but that they were going to hear from all of us, which was a statement of, you're going to pay for what you've done.
Right.
So, do you think all of our politics too are connected in this?
Absolutely. You cannot even be in Congress without pledging allegiance to Israel. Check out S 270, which is a new law that's going to make boycotting Israel illegal. How come every single person in the Congress in the White House in 2010 was a Rothschild Zionist? Every single one of them. The one who's responsible for the 9/11 Commission, Zaleko, he's a Rothschild Zionist. They're all working for the Rothschilds. Every single one of them. The mayor of Chicago, another one. It's very, very obvious where they're going, and it's like I said, it's very hard to wrap up in one interview. But there are so many different pieces of the same puzzle.
Yeah, where do I think in our present age of digital and technological advances, which has opened up the world, given us all this access, it's artificial because we have less human connection now, I think, than we've ever had.
Yeah.
And it's almost inconceivable to find some of these, things that you're talking about as even being believable.
That's the problem. That's exactly what they want.
Right. But from a historical perspective, you can see that evil motivations, abuses, and a willingness to see other people as expendable by the elitists provides a significant backdrop that we should not ignore. We should pay attention. You made some comments in your opening remarks about you know, how you do want us to investigate, and then you
Yeah.
encourage that. But it's unbelievable how a certain group of people feel like the rest of humanity is just for their, you know, their pleasure.
And
Um,
that's just the beginning of it. Okay. For people who want to know how dirty this whole thing is, see, when somebody says the drug problem in America, oh my God, the drug problem, it has to be taken care of. We have to do something about it, right? Well, you know who started the drug problem? The CIA. Okay. Some affectionately call it the cocaine import agency for a very good reason, because they started the drug wars by going into specific minority neighborhoods and certain villages or certain towns, certain cities, and dropping off crack cocaine, dropping off heroin. Go find out what Barry Seal and also Phil Marshall's role was in flying for these guys. Find out the CIA connection with cocaine. Find out why we're in Afghanistan. We're going to be there another 50 years because of all the minerals that there is, you know, underground. And this is what Greg and I talk about. So everything we're talking about is validated. Something else I wanted to bring up too is Standing Rock. I was looking at them like in front of unarmed water protectors. How did they manage to get, you know, those armored vehicles and the LRAD sonar weapons and incredible machinery? And this is the Israelification of the United States that's beginning. That's what they call it. It's the militarization of the police. It's Obama firing his higher ups. Remember that? Because they would not fire on American citizens. This is the rabbit hole that we get into when we start talking like this. And, you know, the Clinton death list, people just are knocked off by Big Pharma or by the Clintons themselves because they're in the way. The Haitian diplomat who was going to testify against the corruption of the Clinton Foundation was, I think, one of the latest ones. And then there was that journalist in Malta who was going to blow the whistle also. Daphne, I forget her last name. It's, you know, it's all over the place, and people just don't connect the dots because they don't know the history. They don't have the time to research, and this is why government gets away with it.
well, this may sound, you know, like a little bit strange, but you know, in your environment, you have probably, you know, lots of people who are connected to the information that you already hold. They've connected the dots and they've put things together. But you know, one of the, I know it's in your heart that you want people who are not awake and aware to all of this to wake up, to understand, you know, that we've been duped and, you know, we've been lied to, that there's some, you know, there's some really devious elements at work. And so for people who need a starting point where they can, you know, give themselves the opportunity to begin to see what is happening rather than having to start at a much more informed position that you have. What would be some of the books, the articles, the publications where somebody was just wanting to begin to understand some of the things that are going on politically? Where could they go? Where would you send them?
One word pops up in my head: Ole Dammagard. Ole is O-L-E. Dammagard is D-A-M-M-A-G-A-R-D. He's phenomenal as far as a researcher, and he's doing what I'm trying to do humbly, but he's done it a lot more, and he's got a lot more connections. Everybody that they're really saying is criminal. You know, Julian Assange is another one. What people have to understand is they have to stay away from the media. They have to stay away from, you know, 96% of all media, of all the stuff that we see on TV is owned by 6 corporations or less, and they all work for Israel. It's the same thing. They want to distract you and send you over to the left while they're doing stuff on the right. And, you know, the Las Vegas shooting, that's going to come out awfully fast, because more and more people are finding out that there's, you know, that was no lone shooter. That was no one person, one deranged person, as they called him. For, you know, that's what they called Oswald back then. No, this was an FBI ordered hit from a helicopter. You know, just like they do in Vietnam, they slide the door open and they start shooting people. That's what Gregory Ford was saying that he has as far as information goes. The helicopter was supposed to be the sign to open fire. They opened fire too early, and that's what the 308 casings were all about. And on the ground, the bullets have a bullet pattern of an N, and it kind of looks weird. But when you stand the N up, it's a Z.
Yeah,
You know?
some of the stuff is just staggering, you know, to the mind.
But it really makes sense when you know, pick one. Go find out about the CIA and the FBI and the Finders program. Find out about how, you know, MIT. Okay, I'm from the Boston area. People say MIT, you practically want to do this because they're so well known, and they're so high as far as, you know, the scale of reputation goes, right? The MIT force-fed retarded students with radioactive oatmeal to see how they would react. They're part of investigations with something like 80 other prominent institutions, you know, giving pregnant women injections with radiation to see how they'd react. These are all German scientists from World War II, which was not lost by the Germans. They brought the Germans over here, and there's plenty of proof about how they, you know, this was all MK Ultra, Project Artichoke, Project Bluebird. Those are all real events. Werner von Braun talking about how we can, you know, stock the tips of rockets with, you know, with nuclear material. He's sitting there talking to JFK. I have a picture of that. And JFK said no to all of it. He said no to continuing the war in Vietnam. He said no to attacking Cuba. He pissed a lot of people off. And this is one of the reasons why George Bush, the CIA, Inc., had him, you know, assassinated. They could not, it could not fail, you know?
You know, Luca, I've spent quite a bit of my life, and I still now. I love inspiration. You know, I love positivity. One of the things that I hate, I guess, would be my Achilles heel, is manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think manipulation is possible to a large extent because of fear.
Exactly.
But I also think that love destroys fear. And I don't really worry about the future in terms of eternity. You know, we're all going to die at some point, and then we're going to face eternity. That's not really an active concern for me.
Mm-hmm.
An active concern for me is I'm concerned about the future in terms of reality. And I think that we are greatly misinformed. I do think it's strategic. I do think the propaganda machine is, you know, a very powerful aspect of controlling populations, because if you hear something again and again and again, you know, you start to think, you know, that it's true. And so I believe that reality is often what is ignored. And so I have a personal strategy for staying encouraged. I call it staying in the groove. I like to stay in the groove in the midst of a world that, you know, certainly does seem to be spiraling out of control.
Right.
But you deal with so much corruption with your investigative work. I mean, you're entrenched in it. You're saturated in it. And I know from our personal conversations, you know, that you do things for yourself to stay in the groove.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk a little bit about what you do. How do you, knowing all of this stuff and not letting it, you know, take you down to, you know, complete insanity or depression or, you know, all of that. What do you do to stay in the groove?
First of all, I want to thank you for asking that question, because it takes one to know one.
Thanks.
And I think that's a really, really beautiful and heartfelt question. And I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for asking me that. Because of Native tradition, because of what I've learned about Native tradition, because of what I do with Native tradition, I do the Inipi Sweat Lodge, it's called, once every 30 days or once every moon. And that's incredible
What
in
does
itself.
that do for you, for people that might not know what that is?
It's the same thing as meditation. It's the same thing as prayer. People have to understand we've been duped about prayer as well. We've been duped about religions. We've been duped about, Islam is terrible, or Muslims are bad, I think every single belief system in this world, if you go to its core, to what its foundation is, they're exactly the same. They preach love, they preach tolerance, they preach acceptance, they preach service to all, okay? I think it's because of the world conquering that they're trying to make it look like we're attacked by such horrible people, which aren't true at all. My best friends are Muslims. I have one person that I talk to from Israel as well. It's got nothing to do with where you are or geographically. It's got everything to do with who you are as a person. And everybody asks me the same question in a more blunt way. They say, how can you do this? Knowing all this stuff, and you must need psychological help. And it's not true either. Everything that I'm learning is motivating. Everything that I'm learning, the more horrible it gets, the more motivating it is for me to expose it, because it tells me how blessed I am to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. It's telling me, wow, aren't you proud to be, who you are after witnessing stuff like that? Even more of a reason to push, even more of a reason to go on Facebook. This morning, I just posted something about how they're starting to censor me now in a big way. They took a picture of the Holocaust that I posted, and they're saying this goes against our community policy and all this stuff. And I posted that. I took a screenshot and I posted that, and I said, look, this is what they're doing. They don't want the truth to be told. So this is what I do. I meditate a lot as well. If you want to get away from this world for about 10 or 15 minutes, take your chair, sit down facing the sun, close your eyes, and stay there. Don't think of anything. Don't even do anything for about 10 or 15 minutes. And that's where the wonder starts to happen, because you have to be still in order to, in order for spirit to come, in order to acknowledge what spirit is. You have to be calm. You have to be quiet. This is something people don't even know how to do anymore.
Yeah, it's, I have to tell you that, I've been prayer has been a part of my life for, a long, long time, but I did very early on adjust what I was understanding prayer to be and how I was engaging in it. And getting quiet was something that I could do. I was not good at meditating until I started actually practicing it, and I think
yes,
that does help, help people get get the gist of it and the benefits of it. But meditation is not some Eastern guru thing. I mean, it's about,
no.
We all need to get quiet. We all need to get still. We have to disengage from this tide that wants to pull us in a direction that's not in our best interest.
And Rick, there are so many different things too. If you don't give the vehicle the proper type of gasoline, it won't run right.
Right.
So if you don't eat properly, you're way off to begin with. You have to start healing yourself, which means getting away from big pharma, which means getting away from the horrible food, which I love. Okay,
we all do,
and
I think.
it's a non-stop workout. So people nowadays can't sit still for 10 minutes without talking to each other. They can't. It's an impossibility. And in the original people's context, that's the first thing that the young are taught. Go to the forest, sit by the water, and stay there for 4 hours. Stay there for this afternoon. Come back when you tell us you learned something. You know, and the young one learns to, the quieter you get, the more you can hear. It's the whole, it's polar opposite from what government is. If you took a list and you took everything that government does and everything that we're supposed to be doing, they're all polar opposites. Killing each other, loving each other, peace, war, you know, acceptance. No way. We're self-proclaimed. Every single thing is polar opposite because there isn't an intelligent, well, what's the word? Right-thinking woman in the White House. If there was, there wouldn't be any war. Infrastructure wouldn't be falling apart. There'd be no homeless people. You know, because we know what comes first. Women know what the right-thinking women, not like Hillary Clinton, please. We can't talk about her. You know, but the right-thinking women were the ones that ran everything. With the original people, with the matriarchal tribes. And this is what church and state got rid of. It's one of the first things they got rid of. Woman stays in the house. The man goes out to conquer the world, you know? So.
Yeah, there is a lot to be said about maintaining independent thought. And, you know, I do know that we all love connection and we love to be supported. And, you know, we want to feel the safety of a group. But when you buy into group think and you surrender your power to think for yourself, we get ourselves into a lot of trouble before we realize what has actually happened. And so, you know, even in my own life, my own awakening, my own transformation into deeper spirituality, for me, it's about God. For me, it's about the Father. It's about, you know, realizing why he put us here in the first place and what those relationships should have, you know, the intent of what that was to be.
Exactly.
And how powerful it is when that still happens, and it does still happen.
The word power, you nailed it, because even George Carlin was secretly telling us things like that. You know, they don't want a population of thinkers, they want a population of workers. Even Rockefeller said it because they know the power of the people. They know when women find their real power, they could stop wars with just one look.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned George Carlin. I was a huge fan of George Carlin. He would definitely challenge you. I don't care who you were. If you listen to him long enough, whatever your position or belief is, George Carlin had a way of challenging you, and you know, in a good way. I didn't always agree with his conclusions, but I could never disagree with the provocation, you know, of thinking about, you know, the things that
we need to challenge ourselves. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say these things, because that's exactly what the problem is. You know, what they want is a dumbed down society. That's why they're vaccinating. That's why they're spraying stuff from the air. That's why they're making us eat high fructose corn syrup, GMOs, polluted water. You know, this is all about dumbing down the people so they don't really see and they don't really care. They love their servitude. They're going to stay slaves. This is, you know, round two of Germany, of what we saw, even the original people.
Well, there are two really powerful aspects of what's going on in our society that might get overlooked initially until people further understand it. But you have about 70% of our population now. I don't know what it is around the world, but here in this country, you have about 70% of the population who would all fit into a victim class.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got all of these people who are feeling offended and wounded, and they become focused on just only what would ratify what they need. And they don't see how that's connected to the bigger picture. And so they're making, we all get victimized, but none of us should be victims. And so that becomes a huge problem when people are willingly saying, yeah, I'm offended, you've offended me, I belong in this class over here, and they're not working to bring out any solutions. They just become
Right.
a part of the overall problem. And the second factor is the number of people. It slips my mind immediately. I almost want to say the number, but I'm not going to, because in my mind right now I can't be certain that I'm saying it correctly. But the number of people who are on antidepressants or some form,
Yeah.
of a personality modifier is enormous.
Yeah.
So it is a huge problem for us as we try to work our way back to being alive and being who we were intended to be, and taking back the authority of our individual rights, and who we are as people, instead of who we've become as this conglomerate.
See, we're talking polar opposites again, because what people are today is they work for themselves, they keep what they have, and you can't have it. Okay? The original people were the exact opposite. I'm answering your first factor here. Tecumseh said it really well, and Uncas said it even better. Uncas was Mohegan from the East Coast, and he said, "This heart of mine is not mine, it's yours." Tecumseh, Shawnee from the Ohio River Valley, he said that, if you can't wake up in the morning and be grateful for what you have, be grateful for your life and your health and your eyes, the fault only lies with you. The fault only lies inside yourself. So it's all about forgetting the self. It's about feeding the self by feeding what's out there. I want to do something for you that'll make me feel better. That's people don't understand that, because that's what we've been taught.
Yeah, for me, I phrase it. We're saying the same thing here, but for me, I phrase it, from my perspective. We were created in love. We are
Yeah.
love, and we're designed to give and receive love. When we function in that, the world is a very beautiful place. But in the absence of all of that, we have all these imposters who fill up the void of the absence of love and care and concern. And then we get it all. We get the corruption, we get the greed, we get murder, we get violence, we get the unrest, the lack of peace. We get the opposite of everything that we were designed to have. And so we got a lot of work ahead of us, but I'm like you. I'm very hopeful. I'm very encouraged. I'm, the more that I put the pieces together, the more I feel empowered just to share.
Love those words. I love those words. I love those words, Rick. Empowered is powerful.
Yeah, it is.
Can I say two things? I keep cutting you off. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Tell me not to interrupt you. The meme says that we are not responsible for the way other people live their life. We're not. Oh, come on. Our whole job is to make other people. No, it's not. No, it's not. And even Jesus Christ himself said it. He said, if people don't think the way you do, you dust off your clothes and you move on. You don't waste time with people that don't know how to appreciate the pearls. You don't give the pearls to the swine. It's all over the place. You don't waste time trying to convince and trying to convert people, because if you do, you're no better than the people you're bitching about. And that's one of the most important things that I learned not very long ago, because I was so upset and I was trying to make people see this and trying to make people. It's like, no, that's not your job. Your job is to do your work secretly, silently, and those people who can pick it up and who are ready to listen to it, they'll follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people. There was one of the defining moments of my life was when I quit only reading and comprehending what I already believed. And I swapped that out for starting to believe what I could actually gain exposure to and understanding of. And then the
Yeah.
world, became a much different place because I was programmed, like everybody else, from one way or another, to learn, to think, to feel a certain way. And even for me, in the pursuit of of the things, spiritual things, um, we have a God that is so magnificent that he's unsearchable, and yet we draw the conclusions and make him only this big.
Hmm.
And so there's where I think a lot of hijacking takes place. And then, for me, religion is man-made. It's very limiting in its scope, and it draws boundaries, and so it limits you. And so now we're trying to take this God who can do anything and make him only do certain things, instead of being exposed to a much bigger picture.
That's what the Latin word religare, that's what it means, to control and to have people think a certain thing. Religion is outward and spirituality is inward.
Yeah,
It's a completely personal experience. It's
yeah,
got
and
nothing
it's
to do with anybody
limitless.
else. So,
Yeah, and it's
um,
limitless.
if there's one
Well,
thing that,
we could talk a long time about
yes,
religion and other things. But Luca, look, I want to thank you for taking the time to be. I know you're a busy guy, and so I really appreciate this conversation with you. And I'm getting to know more and more about your heart, and so I'm always, at first I was so shocked by some of the things that I was hearing.
mm,
And then, there's an old adage, it's been around for a while. I hate to use it, but I think it's relative. People don't really care what you know until they know how much you care. And one of
mm,
the things I'm discovering about you is that you care very deeply and very passionately about other human beings. And that motivates me. And so, I get very interested in what you're talking about, and finding the time to investigate those things for myself. And, there's a much broader picture here. But look, I'm sure that you'd be interested in hearing from people. So I want to put up your email if that's okay.
absolutely.
It's minaluca@gmail.com.
Right.
So write your comments, your questions, your interest. I'm sure Luke would be happy to look at that. I also would be happy to hear from you about any thoughts about our programming or any other things that you want to mention. And you can reach me at rickonlife@gmail.com. And so I'm very glad that you took the time to be here with us today. And just remember, whatever's going on in your life, just sprinkle a little love on it.